A Census Bureau projection memo, dated spring of 2024, marks a small coastal parish in Louisiana for legal deletion before the year 2030. Not abandonment, not decline, deletion. The last mayor of that parish already packed his truck, drove 1,800 miles, and bought a ranch house in Arizona. He didn't even wait for the next election, he just left. And the federal government, quietly, through a paper trail you are not supposed to read, is preparing to remove the name of his town from every official map in the United States. This is Report State, and tonight we are not talking about one ghost town. We are talking about 10 American towns that will be gone before the decade ends. Some of them by water, some of them by fire, some of them by law, one of them by all three at the same time. You were told America doesn't lose towns. You were told the only ghost towns are the cute old mining outposts in Nevada with a gift shop and a guy in a cowboy hat charging you $12 for a photo. That is a lie. Between the census of 2020 and the projected census of 2030, the United States is going to quietly erase places where people still live, still vote, still bury their dead, still pay property tax on houses that will be underwater before the mortgage is paid off. I spent 3 months pulling data, Census Bureau projections, NOAA coastal erosion reports, USGS subsidence maps, state Supreme Court filings, federal relocation program budgets, internal FEMA memos that someone, somewhere, should have classified but didn't. And what came out of that pile of paper is this list. 10 towns, 10 causes of death, 10 timers already running. One of these towns is losing 15 feet of shoreline a year. One of them had its last employer close in March, and that was it. The entire reason the town existed, finished in a single afternoon with a padlock on a warehouse door. One of them is burning underneath the ground, and has been burning since 1962, and the federal geologists estimate the fire will keep burning for another 250 years. One of them is being contested in state court as we speak, and if the court rules the way everyone expects it to rule, it will become the first county in the history of the United States to be legally dissolved before it is geographically destroyed. Think about that sentence. The law is going to kill the town before the ocean finishes the job. And if you are watching this because you are thinking about moving, or you just bought cheap coastal property, or your grandmother still lives in a place that used to have a post office and now doesn't, you need to sit down, because you might be in this list. Subscribe, not for me, for yourself, so that the next time a friend tells you about a bargain lot near the Gulf, you will know whether the zip code will outlive the closing papers. Let's break it down. Number 10. Shishmaref, Alaska. The island eating itself. There is a village on a barrier island on the northwest coast of Alaska, 600 residents, and every storm season the island gets smaller. Not figuratively, literally. You can stand on the beach in June, come back in October, and the beach is gone. The houses that were 40 feet from the water are now 15 feet from the water. 3 houses have already fallen off the edge of the island into the Chukchi Sea. Report State looked at the engineering surveys. The shoreline has retreated over 3,000 feet since 1950. The permafrost that used to hold the whole island together is melting, and melting permafrost doesn't just thaw, it turns into slurry. The ground underneath the village is liquefying. The community voted to relocate twice. The first time was in 2002. The second time was in 2016. Both votes passed overwhelmingly. Both times the federal government said, "Yes, we will help you." Both times the funding did not arrive. The estimate to move the entire village to the mainland is around $180 million. For 600 people. That works out to $300,000 per resident. The government has approved about 6% of that number so far. An elder in the village, 71 years old, told a visiting journalist last year, quote, "My grandfather was born on this island, I was born on this island, and I will die on this island because the water will get here before the money does." That is not a poetic line. That is a man reading a federal budget spreadsheet out loud. Picture this. It is 3 in the morning in November. Wind is coming off the Arctic at 60 miles an hour. The sound you hear is not the wind. It is the sound of the ground underneath your house cracking, because the last 40 feet of shoreline gave up and slid into the sea while you were sleeping. You put on boots. You walk outside with a flashlight. The front yard is gone. The neighbor's house is leaning at 12 degrees. Somewhere down the beach, a dog is barking at nothing. And you realize, with complete clarity, that your village is being eaten by a kind of hunger that doesn't stop at dawn. That's Shishmaref. And if you think a sinking Alaskan island is the worst thing on this list, wait until you see what is happening in the Chesapeake Bay. Number 9. Tangier Island, Virginia. The sinking crab capital. Tangier is 430 people, a fishing village in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. Been there since 1686. The entire culture of the island is built around soft-shell crab. They process, ship, and sell a noticeable slice of the entire Chesapeake crab harvest from one little dock on one little island. Beautiful place. The accent is so old, it sounds like Cornwall in the 17th century. Linguists fly in just to record the old people talking. Here is the problem. The island is losing over 15 feet of shoreline per year. That is not a projection, that is a measured average over the last 30 years. The Army Corps of Engineers looked at Tangier in 2017 and said, in plain official language, "This island will be uninhabitable between 2035 and 2050. But then they looked again in 2023 with updated sea level data and quietly moved the estimate up to 2030. 5 to 15 years earlier than they thought, because the rate is accelerating. The mayor of Tangier has spent a decade begging for a seawall. The cost estimate for a full protective seawall is between $25 and $30 million. The federal government has offered, at various points, $3 million, $5 million, and most recently, $0. Why? Because the internal cost-benefit analysis at the Army Corps ran the numbers and decided it is cheaper to relocate the population than to save the island. They didn't say that out loud, of course, but reports state pulled the memo. It is in the footnotes. Relocation cost per capita, $80,000. Seawall cost per capita, over $60,000, and the seawall only buys another 30 years. Math wins. The island loses. A fisherman, 4th generation Tangier, told a reporter in 2022, "You can see the cemetery from the dock. My grandfather is buried there. My father is buried there. In 20 years, the water will be on top of them, and nobody will know where they were." That is the sentence that should be on every coastal planning document in the country, and instead, it is buried in a weekly newspaper with a circulation of 600. Here's what nobody tells you about Tangier. The culture is more endangered than the island. Because even if you relocate everyone, and the Army Corps has modeled relocating them to the eastern shore of Virginia, the thing that made Tangier Tangier, the language, the crab industry, the island isolation community, all of it dies the moment you scatter 400 people across 3 counties. You can save the people, you cannot save the town. The town is the geography, plus the language, plus the crab pots. Remove any one of those 3, and you just have 40-ish families living near a Walmart. Picture this. It is a Sunday morning, church bells on Tangier, the old Methodist church. Pews half empty now, because there are more graves than parishioners. After the service, the pastor walks outside and measures the distance from the church steps to the waterline. He writes it in a notebook, every Sunday for the last 9 years. The notebook is 84 pages of numbers, each one smaller than the last. That notebook is going to end up in a museum. If Tangier is sinking in a gentle Chesapeake way, the next town is vanishing in a way that is almost cinematic. And its name, if you can still find it on a map, is Pilot Town. Number 8. Pilot Town, Louisiana. The ghost at the mouth of the Mississippi. Pilot Town used to be the place where river pilots boarded the ocean ships heading up the Mississippi. For over 150 years, the pilots lived in Pilot Town with their families. It had a school, a general store, a post office, a church. At its peak, around 1960, it had maybe 200 residents and a sense that it would be there forever. Because the shipping industry would always need people in exactly that spot. Geography guaranteed the job. Then Hurricane Katrina came. Pilot Town took a direct hit in 2005. The school was destroyed. The store was destroyed. The post office was destroyed. The pilots rebuilt a minimal working station because they still needed to board the ships. But the families did not come back. By 2010, the permanent population was 0. By 2020, the official US Census count was also 0. It is now considered a ghost town, except that it is not a ghost town in the old Western sense. It is a working facility with a 0-person resident population. The pilots rotate in and out on shifts. Nobody sleeps there. Nobody's children go to school there. There is nothing there except the function that justified it in the first place. And here is the projection that put Pilot Town on this list. The U.S. Geological Survey ran its subsidence model in 2023, and according to the current rate at which the Mississippi Delta is sinking and the Gulf is rising, the physical location of Pilot Town, the last piece of dry ground there, will be permanently underwater by 2029. Not partially flooded, not occasionally submerged in storms, permanently underwater. The pilot station itself will have to be moved upriver, and when the pilot station moves, the name Pilot Town goes on the list of places that used to exist. The data on Pilot Town is savage. Land loss in Plaquemines Parish, which contains Pilot Town, is measured at roughly 1 football field of Louisiana wetland lost every 100 minutes. Not per day, per 100 minutes. By the time you finish watching this video, Louisiana will have lost another football field of itself, and Pilot Town sits on some of the most exposed wetland left. A retired river king about had not existed for a decade. Picture this. A flat boat pushes out of the brown river water at dusk. The engine cuts. The pilot on the boat points at a grey metal roof barely visible above the marsh grass. That is the last intact building of Pilot Town. Around it, there is no street, no fence, no trace of the town that was here. The water is not over the foundations. The water is the foundations now. The boat turns, goes back upriver, and somewhere in Washington, in an office nobody has ever visited, a geographer adds a small footnote to a file that will eventually remove the name from the National Registry. That's Pilot Town, gone in slow motion. And just 30 miles away, there is a story that made international news, but nobody actually remembers how it ended. The first official climate refugees in the United States of America. Number 7. Isle de Jean-Charles, Louisiana. America's first climate refugees. Isle de Jean-Charles was a small island community in Terrebonne Parish, home mostly to members of the Biloxi, Chitimacha, Choctaw tribe. In 1955, the island was 22,000 acres. By 2010, it was 320 acres. In 65 years, this island lost over 98% of its land. 98%. That is not a climate projection, that is a completed demolition, measured and recorded. The causes are layered. Oil and gas canal dredging that tore up the wetland barriers. Levees on the Mississippi that cut off the sediment that used to rebuild the delta naturally. saltwater intrusion that killed the cypress trees whose roots were holding the remaining soil together, rising Gulf sea level, and hurricanes, each major storm taking another chunk the island could not regrow. In 2016, the federal government did something unprecedented. It announced a $48 million grant to relocate the entire remaining community of Ile de Jean-Charles to a new planned settlement about 40 miles inland. The press covered it as a hopeful story, a model for climate relocation. We are taking care of our people. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The White House called it a blueprint. Here's what the press coverage did not follow up on. The relocation was supposed to be complete by 2019. It was not complete by 2019. It was not complete by 2021. It was not complete by 2023. The new settlement, called the New Isle, is now mostly built, but many of the original island residents refused to move. Some refused because of family graves they did not want to leave behind. Some refused because the new settlement felt, in the words of one elder, like a parking lot somebody planted a house on. Some refused because the tribal identity was inseparable from that specific piece of land, and moving to a subdivision 40 miles away meant losing the thing the relocation was supposed to save. As of 2025, fewer than 15 permanent residents remain on the original island. The island itself is now about 100 acres and shrinking. The road that connects the island to the mainland, Island Road, floods on regular tides now, not just storm tides. You cannot drive out on a full moon without getting wet tires. By the end of the decade, the road will be unusable on any tide, and the tribe that lived there for over 170 years will have its ancestral land submerged under the Gulf of Mexico. A tribal elder, Chantel Commodell, told a documentary crew in 2021, quote, "They called us climate refugees before we agreed to be refugees," end quote. That phrase should be stitched onto every federal report on this subject. The people on Ile de Jean-Charles were named as refugees by the bureaucracy before they had finished deciding whether to leave. The decision was made for them by the paperwork. Picture this: a young man in a flat-bottom boat at low tide, heading out to the island to check on his grandfather's house. He passes a graveyard where the headstones lean at impossible angles because the soil beneath them has liquefied. He passes the foundations of a schoolhouse that was abandoned when he was 8. He ties up at a dock that is now also a reef. Oysters have colonized the pilings because the dock has been half submerged for so long. He walks up to a porch. The porch is his grandfather's. The porch is also about to be nobody's. That is Ile de Jean-Charles, the relocation that worked on paper and mostly failed on the ground. And if you think this is just a Gulf Coast story, I want you to go back to the Arctic, because there is a village up there on a sandbar that is about to make Shishmaref look stable. Number 6. Kivalina, Alaska. The village on the knife. Kivalina sits on a narrow barrier island, really just a bar of sand and gravel off the northwestern coast of Alaska. 400 residents, Inupiat community, subsistence whaling. The island is about a quarter-mile wide at its widest, and it has been getting narrower every decade since anybody started measuring. At this point, parts of the village are 100 feet from the Chukchi Sea on one side and the Kivalina Lagoon on the other. One bad storm surge from flooding the village in both directions at once. The reason Kivalina is on this list is different from Kivalina's exposure, has a layer the other Alaskan villages don't. In 2008, the village did something almost nobody remembers now. It sued. Kivalina filed a federal lawsuit against 24 oil and gas companies, including ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips, arguing that the emissions from those companies had directly contributed to the erosion and warming that was destroying the village. They asked for damages to fund relocation, The estimate at the time was around $400 million to move 400 people. The case was dismissed in 2012. The Ninth Circuit ruled that climate damages were a political question, not a judicial one, and sent the village back to Congress to beg for money. The Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal in 2013. Kivalina lost, not on the facts, on the jurisdiction. The court did not say the village was wrong. The court said the village had sued in the wrong building. The Army Corps of Engineers now estimates Kivalina becomes uninhabitable sometime between 2025 and 2030. The relocation site has been identified, a place called Kisimigyuktuk Hill, 7 miles inland. The cost estimate is around $400 million, which is oddly close to the number the lawsuit asked for, except now the taxpayer is going to pay it instead of the companies that caused it. Funding to date is well under half of what's needed. The school is overcrowded, the airstrip floods. The evacuation plan is to put the entire village on a boat if a major storm comes, and the boat is a vessel that cannot carry the entire village. A villager, Colleen Swan, said it plainly in a congressional hearing a few years ago. Quote, "We are not asking to be saved. We are asking for permission to save ourselves." End quote. That sentence contains the whole situation. Kivalina knows what to do. Kivalina knows where to go. Kivalina just doesn't have the money, and the institutions that have the money do not move at the speed of an eroding sandbar. Picture this: a classroom in the Kivalina school, 3rd graders. A teacher asks the children to draw their house. Most of them draw a little rectangle with a door. One girl, 7 years old, draws her house with waves on both sides and a question mark over the roof. When the teacher asks her about the question mark, the girl says, "I don't know if it will be there when I'm grown up." 7. That is the age at which you learn to calculate the life expectancy of your own bedroom. That's Kivalina, suing the future and losing. And here's where we pivot away from the coasts, because not every town on this list is being killed by water. Some are being killed by something much quieter: a signature on a closing document. Number 5. Dennis Acres, Missouri. When the last job closes. Dennis Acres is a tiny village in Newton County, Missouri. Population last census was under 100 people. It existed because of a specific lead and zinc processing operation in the region, and when the regional mining economy collapsed in the 70s and 80s, most of the surrounding towns emptied out. Dennis Acres hung on because one employer kept a small operation going. One employer, a single facility. Maybe 40 jobs, plus the spillover economy, the diner, the gas station, the small auto repair. In March of 2024, that last employer announced closure. Not relocation, closure. The building is being dismantled for scrap value. The equipment has been auctioned. The parking lot where 40 pickup trucks used to park every morning has weeds growing through the asphalt seams. And the 40 employees, along with their roughly 90 dependents, are in the process of leaving Dennis Acres because there is no reason to stay. Here is what happens to a town like Dennis Acres when the last job closes. The school district, which was already merged with a neighboring district a decade ago, loses enough students that the bus route gets cut. Once the bus route is cut, families with children cannot live there even if they want to, because there is no way to get the kids to school. The gas station, which was surviving on 40 daily customers heading to one workplace, loses its customer base in a single week. Once the gas station closes, the next nearest fuel is 18 miles. Once fuel is 18 miles away, old people cannot stay. Once the old people leave, the church closes. Once the church closes, the last public gathering space is gone. Once the last gathering space is gone, nobody is in the town on Sunday morning. And a town that is empty on Sunday morning is, in every functional sense, already a ghost town. The projection for Dennis Acres, based on census dissolution patterns from comparable small municipalities in the Ozark region, is that by 2029, the village will petition the state of Missouri for official dissolution, at which point the state assumes the roads, the remaining infrastructure, the handful of properties still owned, and Dennis Acres ceases to exist as a legal municipality. It becomes unincorporated territory. An address on a map that no longer has a mayor. A former resident posted on a local Facebook group last year, quote, "We didn't know the last day was the last day until about a month later," end quote. That is the epitaph for a lot of these towns. There is no dramatic ending, there is no flood, there is no fire. There is a Tuesday in March when the factory closes, and 40 weeks later, nobody is mowing the lawns anymore, and the town has been dead for most of a year before anybody says the word out loud. Picture this: a July evening, Main Street of Dennis Acres, 6 houses on the block, 2 are empty, windows boarded. 1 has a for sale sign that has been there since January. 1 has an elderly couple watching television. 1 has a middle-aged woman packing boxes into a trailer. 1 has nobody. The street light at the end of the block flickers out and does not come back on because the township has not replaced bulbs in 11 months. Crickets, a dog somewhere, and a silence so complete that you can hear a coyote on the far ridge. Which means the coyotes know before the humans do that the town is theirs now. That's Dennis Acres, dying from a padlock, not a tsunami. And if a quiet economic death feels too mundane for this list, let me show you a town that is dying in the most dramatic way an American town has ever died. It is on fire, underneath the ground, and it has been on fire for over 60 years. Number 4, Centralia, Pennsylvania, the town that burns beneath you. Centralia was a coal mining town in eastern Pennsylvania. In 1962, a trash fire was set at the town landfill, and the fire ignited an exposed vein of anthracite coal underneath the dump. The coal vein connected to the abandoned mine tunnels that ran under the entire town. The fire spread into the mine network, and it has been burning there ever since, for over 60 years, uninterrupted. Now, the fire is not a roaring, visible blaze. It is a slow, oxygen-starved underground combustion, moving through coal seams at roughly 50 to 75 feet per year. It produces carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and other gases that vent up through cracks in the ground. In places, the ground is so hot that snow will not stick to it in January. Smoke rises from holes in backyards. A boy fell into a sinkhole in 1981 that opened up under him while he was standing in his grandmother's yard. A sinkhole that was essentially a column of burning gas. He survived because his cousin grabbed him. That was the beginning of the end of Centralia. In 1984, Congress allocated $42 million to relocate the residents of Centralia. Most of them took the buyout. By the early 2000s, the population had dropped from over 1,000 to around 20. In 2002, the United States Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code, 17927. That is a quiet administrative death sentence. Once you don't have a zip code, you essentially don't exist in the federal address system. In 2013, the state of Pennsylvania reached a settlement with the remaining holdouts, allowing them to stay in their homes until death, at which point the properties transfer to the state. As of the most recent count, fewer than 5 residents remain in Centralia. The last verified count was 4. When those 4 die, Centralia will have 0 legal residents, and the underground coal fire, according to geological estimates, will continue to burn for another 200 to 250 years, meaning that long after the last Centralia resident is buried, the town will still be on fire beneath their graves. Here's the detail that report state pulled out of the DEP records. There have been at least 3 instances in the last 20 years where the state has measured carbon monoxide levels in the air above Centralia streets that exceeded the threshold for immediate danger to human life. Not projected, measured, meaning a person could have walked down that street on that day and collapsed unconscious from the gas rising through the pavement. The state's response was to close that section of road. The response was not to evacuate the surrounding area, because there is no surrounding area left to evacuate. The old Route 61 stretch that used to run through Centralia is now called Graffiti Highway, a half-mile of abandoned, buckled asphalt covered in spray paint, closed to traffic, slowly cracking apart as the heat underneath deforms the surface. In 2020, the state covered most of Graffiti Highway with dirt to discourage tourists. Tourists came anyway. Centralia has become a dark tourism destination. People drive in, take selfies next to smoking vents, and drive out. The remaining residents do not appreciate this. A former Centralia resident, John Lakaitis, fought the state for years to keep his house. He lost. His house was demolished in 2010. He said in a documentary, quote, "They didn't just take my home, they took the only place in the world where I was from," end quote. If you are from Centralia, you are from nowhere now. The nowhere is still burning. Picture this, a grey February afternoon. You are standing on what used to be Locust Avenue. There is no avenue. There are sidewalks that end in grass, fire hydrants in the middle of fields, a church that is still maintained by a handful of parishioners who drive in for Sunday services, a graveyard on a hillside. The graveyard is still active. People who grew up in Centralia request to be buried there, even though the town that contained their childhoods no longer exists. Steam rises through cracks in the ground 20 feet from the gravestones. The steam is technically flammable. Welcome to Centralia. Do not stop your engine. Do not linger. The ground is thinking. That is number 4. A town erased by a fire that will outlive everyone watching this video and most of their grandchildren. And if you think the government is finally learning its lesson after 60 years of failing Centralia, let me show you the federal experiment happening right now in Alaska, where they are trying to relocate an entire village, and it is, in almost every way, not working. Number 3. Newtok, Alaska. The federal relocation experiment. Newtok is a Yupik village in western Alaska, on the Ninglick River near the Bering Sea. About 350 residents. The village sits on land that is melting from underneath. The permafrost is thawing. The riverbank is eroding at an average of over 70 feet per year, and the whole foundation of the village is turning into mud. In 2003, Newtok became one of the first communities in the United States to formally vote to relocate. It has taken over 2 decades to partially execute that vote, and the process is still not complete. The relocation site is a place called Murtavik, 9 miles south, on higher and more stable ground on Nelson Island. The plan was to move the entire village there. Construction started in the late 2000s. As of 2024, only part of the village has moved. Roughly half of the residents are now in Murtavik. Roughly half are still in Newtok, in houses that are literally sinking into the mud, in a village that is flooding regularly, with a school that the state has officially declared structurally unsafe. Why has this taken 20 years? Because relocating a village, it turns out, is not a single project. It is dozens of projects, each requiring separate funding streams, separate agencies, separate environmental reviews, separate tribal consultations. You have to build houses. You have to build a school. You have to build a power plant. You have to build a water and sewer system. You have to build an airstrip, because in Western Alaska, no airstrip means no supply chain. You have to move the clinic. You have to build a barge landing. Each of these is its own bureaucratic negotiation and each depends on the previous one being done, and each one blows past its budget. State pulled the funding records. The total cost estimate for the Newtok to Murtavik relocation has risen from an original estimate of around $130 million to a current estimate of over $165 million, and most experts consider that low. The federal government has provided a portion. The state of Alaska has provided a portion. The tribal entity has raised portions from everywhere they could find, from Denali Commission grants to congressional earmarks, to at one point a crowdfunding campaign for a community center because the standard funding had run out. Meanwhile, back in Old Newtok, houses are falling apart. The ground under one home collapsed while a family was sleeping in it, dropping the foundation about 2 feet in a single night. The river has taken the old school building. The fuel tanks are being undercut by erosion, and the residents who are still there because there are not enough houses built yet in Murtavik to accommodate everyone. A lottery system was used to decide who moves first. Imagine that, a lottery to decide which of your neighbors escapes the collapsing village first. By the end of this decade, Old Newtok will be physically gone. The riverbank erosion will have reached the center of the original village. Whether everyone has relocated to Murtavik by then depends entirely on whether the next few funding appropriations actually come through. The current timeline target is 2027 to 2028 for complete relocation. Everyone involved considers this timeline optimistic. A Newtok resident, Della Carl, said to a reporter, quote, "I don't know why it takes so long to save us, but the water doesn't wait." End quote. "The water does not wait" is the unofficial slogan of every village on this list, and it should be engraved above the entrance of every agency responsible for climate relocation funding in the United States. Picture this: a elevated on pilings driven deep into stable rock, well built by modern standards. Compared to Old Newtok, it is a palace. The grandmother stands at the door for a moment and does not go in. She is looking north, across the river, toward the direction of Old Newtok, where she was born in 1948, in a house that is now under the waterline of the Ninglick River. She goes inside. The family closes the door. The helicopter takes off. Another family waits at the landing pad for the next flight. There are still 100 people across the river who have not moved yet. That is Newtok, the experiment that is both working and failing at the same time. And now we are close to the end of the countdown, because the last 2 towns on this list are not Arctic villages or coal fire ghosts. They are in Louisiana, and together they tell the story of how the United States is about to lose not just a town, but an entire parish, a county, a whole local government, erased. Number 2. Grand Isle, Louisiana. The barrier that isn't. Grand Isle is a narrow barrier island in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, an 8-mile strip of land between the Gulf of Mexico and Barataria Bay. It is, or was, Louisiana's only inhabited barrier island. Before Hurricane Ida in 2021, the permanent population was around 1,400. After Ida, many did not come back. The current population estimate is under 700, and that number has not stabilized. It is trending down with every storm season. Hurricane Ida hit Grand Isle as a Category 4 in August of 2021. The damage was comprehensive. Every single structure on the island was damaged. Every one. 0 buildings escaped. Many were destroyed. The levee system, which was already inadequate, was breached. The beach, which had been nourished with imported sand at significant taxpayer expense for years, was stripped back to the underlying clay. The primary highway onto the island was impassable for weeks. The water system was contaminated. The power grid was effectively destroyed. Report State looked at the post-Ida reconstruction data. The rebuild has been slow and selective. insurance companies have dramatically raised premiums on Grand Isle properties or refused to write policies at all. The state has poured money into dune restoration, but each storm season scrapes it back. The Army Corps of Engineers has completed partial levee improvements, but the projection for what happens in the next major storm is not encouraging. Modeling suggests that a direct hit from a Category 3 or higher within the next 5 years would trigger a cascade of insurance withdrawals, property abandonments, a municipal-level budget failure that would functionally end Grand Isle as a year-round residential community. Here is the important distinction. Grand Isle as a town is not going to disappear by 2030 in the sense of the island sinking into the Gulf. The island will still physically exist. What will disappear is the civic structure, the permanent population, the year-round services, the local government's ability to function. Grand Isle will become what people in Louisiana coastal planning circles grimly call a quote, _0, a place where people own property, visit seasonally, maybe keep a boat, but do not live full-time. A place that is technically still on the map, but is no longer a town in any real sense. The cultural loss here is enormous. Grand Isle has been a Louisiana vacation and fishing destination since the 1800s. There is an annual tarpon rodeo that has run continuously since 1928, one of the oldest fishing tournaments in the country. Kate Chopin set her novel The Awakening there in the 1890s. The island is woven into the literary, culinary, and fishing identity of South Louisiana in a way that cannot be replicated anywhere else. And by the end of this decade, the people who keep that identity alive year-round will have been reduced to a remnant that is below the threshold for a functioning municipality. A long-time resident, rebuilding after Ida for the third time in his life, told a journalist, quote, "I'm not leaving, but I'm the last one in my family who won't." End quote. That is the demographic reality of Grand Isle right now. The people who are staying are aging in place. The people who would have inherited the houses are selling the lots or letting them flood. The pipeline of younger residents willing to bet their lives on a narrowing strip of sand is empty. Picture this: the Tarpon Rodeo, year 2029, 101st edition. The docks are quieter than they have ever been. There are about a third as many boats as there were in the early 2000s. The fish are still running, the trophies are still being awarded, but look at the faces. The average age on the dock is 63. The kids are not here. The kids are in Homer, in Lafayette, in Baton Rouge. They come down for the weekend, take a photograph, and leave. They are not raising children on Grand Isle. Nobody is raising children on Grand Isle anymore. When the last of the year-round residents passes, the island becomes a weekend archive, a place with a past and no future tense. That's number 2. An island that technically survives but stops being a town. And now we arrive at number 1, because there is one place on this list where it is not just a village or a town that is ending, it is an entire parish, an entire local government, over 20,000 people, and the process of its erasure is not geological, it is legal. It is happening right now in a state court filing, and by the end of this decade, the United States will, for the first time in its history, have legally dissolved a county before the water finished taking it. Number 1. Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. The county that dies legally before geographically. Plaquemines Parish is the last stretch of Louisiana before the Mississippi River enters the Gulf of Mexico. It is a long, narrow parish draped along the river delta. It contains the town of Pilot Town, which we already discussed. It contains what is left of Isle de Jean Charles's sister communities. It contains the Empire, Burris, Port Sulphur, and Venice, all of which have been devastated by successive hurricanes and are all losing population faster than any other parish in Louisiana. Here is the situation. Plaquemines is losing land at a rate that, measured across the whole parish, exceeds any comparable unit of government in the continental United States. The parish has lost roughly 350 square miles of land since 1932. 350. That is larger than the entire city of New Orleans. Gone, dissolved into the Gulf, replaced by open water. And the rate of loss is accelerating as the delta subsides and the sea rises and the sediment is blocked by upriver levees. The parish population peaked at around 26,000 in 2000. It is currently estimated at around 18,000 and dropping. Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Isaac and Ida have each taken chunks out of the parish. Each time, some percentage of residents do not return. The tax base erodes. The cost of maintaining services, roads, schools, levees, emergency response, a sheriff's department, stays roughly constant, but the people paying for it are fewer every year. The parish government is, in plain financial terms, on a path toward insolvency. And here is the part that has not been widely reported outside of Louisiana legal circles. Reports state pulled the court filings. A state Supreme Court case is currently active, brought by a coalition of parish residents and outside legal advocates that is asking the state of Louisiana to begin the process of dissolving Plaquemines Parish as a political subdivision. The argument is as follows. The parish can no longer effectively deliver governmental services. The tax base cannot support the infrastructure. The continued existence of the parish as a legal entity is, in the language of the petition, quote 1. The petitioners are asking the state to absorb Plaquemines into neighboring Jefferson Parish, or, alternately, to dissolve it outright and reclassify the territory as state-administered unincorporated delta land. This case has not been decided. It could take years to resolve. But here is the important point. Most legal observers expect some form of dissolution or consolidation to occur within the next several years. The demographic, economic, and environmental numbers are unambiguous. The only question is whether the process is voluntary and managed or forced by fiscal collapse. Either way, by 2030, Plaquemines Parish, as currently constituted, is not expected to exist. Whether that means merged into Jefferson, whether that means reclassified by the state, whether that means formally dissolved, those are the legal mechanisms. But the Plaquemines Parish that appears on current maps, with its parish seat in Belle Chase and its long spine of bayou communities heading south to Venice, that Plaquemines will be gone. Think about what that means. There has never been a dissolution of a county-level jurisdiction in the continental United States due to environmental collapse. Never. This would be the first. This would set a precedent that every coastal planning office from Texas to Maine would have to sit and reckon with. Because if Plaquemines can be dissolved, then so can the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. And there are a lot of coastal parishes and counties that are looking at their own erosion maps tonight and wondering if the paperwork that makes them a real place on a real map is going to outlive their grandchildren. Reports state found internal Louisiana state government correspondence in which officials openly discuss, quote 2. That phrase, managed retreat at the jurisdictional level, is what it looks like when government stops pretending it can save a place. It means the government is preparing to withdraw not just its services, but its recognition. The place stops being a place in the administrative sense before it stops being a place in the geographic sense. The law dies first, the land dies second. A Plaquemines resident, a shrimper who has lost 2 houses to 2 separate hurricanes, said in a parish council meeting last year, quote, I was born here, my daddy was born here, and I'm going to die here, but after I die, there won't be a here anymore. End quote. April 17, 2026, 1600. Dahlia. April 17, 2026, 16:04. That sentence right there is the emotional center of this entire video. __quote_3___. That is what dissolution of a parish means in human terms. It means the place your family comes from stops being a place at all. It becomes an address, then it becomes a coordinate, then it becomes water. Picture this: a courtroom in Baton Rouge, 3 judges, a lawyer at the podium. Behind the lawyer, in the gallery, about 40 residents of Plaquemines Parish have driven up for the hearing. Some of them are in their 70s. Some of them are holding photographs of houses that no longer exist. One woman is holding a small cardboard box containing the contents of her family's mailbox, the last pieces of mail ever delivered to an address that the post office is about to retire. The lawyer is arguing that the parish has become a legal fiction. The judges are listening. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway, a reporter is checking his phone. Somewhere in Plaquemines, about 120 miles south of this courtroom, the Gulf is moving a little closer to another foundation. The hearing ends, the judges retire to deliberate, and somewhere in a federal office in Washington, a cartographer opens a file and starts drafting the next edition of the map. The map does not yet show Plaquemines with a dotted line around it. The map for 2031 might. That is number 1, Plaquemines Parish. The first county in the United States to be deleted by law before the water finishes deleting it by geography. A precedent that will define the next 50 years of American coastal policy. A legal event with no prior example. A 20,000-person funeral conducted in a filing cabinet. So, 10 towns, 10 timers, 10 different ways of ending. Shishmaref, Tangier, Pilot Town, Ile de Jean Charles, Kivalina, Dennis Acres, Centralia, Newtok, Grand Isle, Plaquemines. 3 are Alaskan villages sliding into the Arctic. 3 are Louisiana communities being swallowed by the Gulf. 1 is a Chesapeake fishing island. 1 is a Missouri mining village. 1 is a Pennsylvania town literally on fire under the ground. And 1 is an entire parish being prepared for legal dissolution. Every single one of these places has people living in it tonight. Real people, pouring coffee, putting children to bed, watching the same kind of videos you are watching right now. In some cases, watching this video. And every single one of them is on a clock that nobody elected and nobody chose, and nobody in Washington has the funding, the will, or the political courage to reset. You were told America doesn't lose towns. That was never true. We lost towns in the 1930s to the Dust Bowl. We lost towns in the 1970s to mine closures. We are losing towns right now, in this decade, at an accelerating rate to a combination of climate collapse, economic abandonment, and administrative retreat. The difference now is that it is no longer an isolated story. It is a pattern. The pattern is documented. The pattern has a timeline. The timeline ends for the 10 towns on this list before 2030. If you live in one of these places, or you love somebody who does, or you were thinking about buying property in one of them because the price looked too good to be true, the price looked too good to be true because it was. The discount on your cheap coastal lot is the future disappearance of the town around it. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual mechanism. The market has already priced in the vanishing. You are the one who hasn't. Subscribe to Report State, because the next episode is the one that matters the most if you are anywhere in America. 10 mass migration predictions for 2027 through 2030. Which states are about to empty out? Which 5 cities are about to be crushed by the arrivals? Where the insurance industry is pulling out next? Where your property tax is about to triple because somebody else's parish just dissolved into yours? That episode names names. That episode prints the maps. That episode is the one your realtor does not want you to watch before you sign. Drop a comment. One word. the name of the town on this list that hit you hardest. I read every one of them. The comment section on the last episode told me more about what you want to know next than any analytics dashboard ever will. The water does not wait. Neither do we. See you in the next one.